Welcome to DealBook 2020, Day 2. We appreciate seeing all of you back with us this morning, and what a day yesterday was, and we have a huge day ahead of us, and we're going to get right to it with our first guest of the day, someone who I'm thrilled to have back with us, Jamie Dimon, of course, the CEO of JPMorgan Chase, who came, I should mention, to our very first DealBook event now 9 years ago. So Jamie, it's thrilling to see you again. So much to talk to you about where we are in the economy, what's going on in Washington, what may or may not happen over the next 4 years from a policy perspective. And I want to talk to you about all of it and more. Good morning.
Great, Andrew. Thrilled to be here.
It's great
to see you on TV.
It's
next time in person.
Next time in person. We will definitely do this in person. I should say this is being broadcast all over. We have lots of people who are joining us. We're going to try to make it as interactive as possible. They may be sending in questions as well to me, and I'll bring them to you. But here's where I wanted to start this conversation, because I think we're all trying to make sense of where we are in this country and what's going to happen with policy over the next 4 years. You are a student of history. You spent a lot of time in Washington talking about and thinking about these issues. And I was struck by a note that you sent out, actually 2 notes that you sent out to your staff in the past month around this election. And about a week and a half before the election, you wrote, "The peaceful and stable transition of power, whether it is to the second administration of a president or a new one, is a hallmark of America's 244 years your history as an independent nation." And then after the election, you said this was a time for unity. And I was struck by those notes because I think if I were to look back in history, CEOs historically didn't have to send notes like that. And so I wonder what you think that says about where we are.
Yeah, so thank you for that, Andrew. So I think, look, CEOs are being asked to do a lot of things today that they weren't asked to do in the past. If you travel around the country, there's a huge frustration, and we're asked to help be part of the solution. So CEOs should work on collaboration and work on jobs and skills and all the things that help make it a better society, not just in the things that help their own business. So that's just one more thing. We need a peaceful transition. We had an election. We have a new president. We should have unity to that. We should support that, whether you liked or not what the election outcome were. You should support the democracy because it is based on a system of faith and trust.
But how worried are you about where we are when it comes to that faith and trust right now? There was just a poll, I think, that came out this morning from Reuters Ipsos that said that half the Republicans in the country think the election was rigged. They don't believe in the election. And this becomes so critically important when we get to some of the policy issues that I know are so critical and important to you. How you ever can get there if people don't even believe in the system.
Yeah. Look, there have been worse times in American history where people didn't trust the system and people talk about leaving the country. And, we had a civil war. So I have deep faith and abiding trust in the reliance of America. We just went through a very hot, election campaign. There will be a new president sworn in on January 20th, and hopefully everyone will take a deep breath and think of one thing. What can we do for our country to help the country do better for all of its citizens? Like J.F. Kennedy asked many, many years ago. And so, hopefully we'll get back to that. And it'll take some leadership, both on the part of government, business, civic society, but that's what we shall aim for.
So this role of CEO as statesman, which I think you appropriately describe over the last 4 years especially, has become, or at least seems like a trend. The question is, and again, maybe it's a history question, is this a trend or is it an historical aberration? Which is to say, was this past 4 years so unusual in terms of having a president that oftentimes was at odds, not just with the business community, but with the public and some of the issues that you've been talking about?
No, if you look at American history, if you go back to World War II, you had a tremendous amount of business people who immediately, once World War II started, said, what can I do to help? They helped President FDR. They weren't necessarily FDR supporters. This goes back to General Motors and DuPont and all these other companies. No, I'm a patriot before I'm a CEO of JPMorgan, but I guess things have changed a little bit. The world is very fast. It's very complex. And this is not an insult to government. I don't think government can do it alone. They need our help, and our help can't be parochial. Our help's got to be what's in the public interest. And obviously, if the country does well, it's better for all businesses too. So it's also in our commercial interest, and we're being asked to by our employees. You're not going to get diversity and inclusion without companies doing it. You're not going to get wages and skills up without companies getting directly involved. I've made a point in the past, Andrew, that CEOs, a lot of us can drive by the worst parts of our society, inner cities, the South Bronx, et cetera. We can drive by literally and figuratively, and we should not. We should say, and I'm gratified, you've seen a lot of CEOs, Doug McMillan is the chair of the BRT, a lot of these CEOs, white men, are saying, this is our problem too, and we are going to double down and try to be part of fixing it. And I think we should.
How outspoken do you think you can be, though, on these issues? Because at the same time that you've called for a peaceful transition of power, a lot of CEOs, and I can ask you directly, but during this transition period, obviously our current president is making lots of claims that are untrue. I can say that. I don't know if you can, and I don't know if CEOs feel that they can actually speak out directly in this moment, especially those that are worried about the democracy.
I think, Andrew, a lot of CEOs don't want to get involved in the day-to-day because you guys, every little dangling thing you spend all your time on. That isn't the point. Unity, collaboration, getting the job done. Again, if you travel outside of Washington, D.C. and New York City, there is deep frustration, particularly, and I don't know if you know this, but this recession, in the average recession, the jobs are lost across the income spectrum. In this recession, almost all the job losses on the bottom 20%. Okay, if you go to inner city South Bronx, 30% unemployment, the kids didn't have computers to do Zoom schooling. The teachers didn't have computers to do Zoom schooling. So that part of society is suffering, and we need to do something about it. So, my view is let's focus on the job at hand: infrastructure, education, skills, second chance for people with criminal backgrounds, the things that will actually make a difference to America and the lives of the people here. And like I said, that's also good for business generally, commercially.
Let's talk about those policy views and initiatives. Before we do that, though, just help us understand where you think the economy is today. Just give us a snapshot, given that you have your tentacles all over it.
Yeah. Well, the word unprecedented is used properly for one of the rare times. We had the biggest downturn ever in 2 months, the biggest upturn ever in 3 months. And we're kind of in this phase now where we don't really know what's going to continue to get better or get worse. And, thank God we have these vaccines coming. Thank God. So I think what we should do is a matter of policies. We're still in the middle of COVID. We have to get through it. We need to help. We need fiscal stimulus. We need to help the unemployed and some of these smaller businesses in particular get through to April or May until the vaccine is there to maximize growth and jobs and all those things that we need for people. And so it's unclear. Now's the time to say, let's not act like it's over. Let's double down and get through COVID as best we can. The health problem, the economic problem, and we get out of it, we got a lot of other things we need to worry about.
But do you see, how much of a light at the tunnel do you see, or do you see even a potential crisis? We had Masa-san join us yesterday, and he said that he is critically worried, not just about the health crisis unto itself, but he's worried about a financial crisis.
Well, I'm not as worried about a financial crisis. I think the Fed stepped in and did a lot of things to avert the worst parts of that, et cetera. But again, I agree with Masa. I'm not worried. I'm just saying focus on the job at hand. We've got to get the vaccine out. We've got to right now. We got to get people safer. And you're seeing a skyrocketing of COVID in just about every part of not just America, of the world. So we got to get through this. So I think it's a mistake to take our eye off that ball, and we need some of that fiscal stimulus just to bring it through. And the other thing, I just mentioned about the fiscal stimulus, I know now we have this big debate. Is it 2.2 trillion, 1.5 trillion? You got to be kidding me. I mean, just split the baby and move on. I mean, this is childish behavior on the part of our politicians. We need to help the citizens of America. And, and let's just get through it. And it reminds me going back when President Obama was trying to get basically effectively Simpson balls done, and the Republicans and Democrats got bogged down in that $800 billion. I would have walked in that last room of negotiation. If I had to give it all up on either side, it would have been great for the country. They should have focused on what's great for the country, not who won the last little part of the negotiation.
So, not that we need to play the blame game, but have you had conversations either with Nancy Pelosi or with Mitch McConnell about this?
I saw Nancy Pelosi a couple of weeks ago in D.C., but I have not spoken to them recently. But I would say the same thing. Just get it done. Split the baby. Move on.
Do you think, though, that's possible, given that every time there's been conversations about a compromise? I mean, you could argue that the compromise didn't happen in the end, based on what you're saying, on the Democratic side as opposed to the Republican side.
I don't want to blame either side, okay? If I was the one walking in the room in the negotiation, I would walk out with the deal, even if I lost my points. I would not sit there and act like I have to win every single little point, every single thing. I understand the arguments on both sides. I think there are completely legitimate arguments on both sides. But my view is that there's a big part of our country which is really struggling. And if you don't believe me, go out there and talk to the people. You know, we've got branches all over the country. You know, we deal with millions of small businesses. That's what we should be focusing on. It's got nothing. It has zero to do with Democrats or Republicans. Okay, so it's got to do with helping those people get through the toughest part of COVID, and we're not through it yet.
If that stimulus doesn't come, what happens then?
Well, then the probability of having a good economic outcome drops. Now, look, I don't know what it means, but the fact is, helping there will help the economy, and we should keep our eye focused on that.
What do you make?
It just increases the probability of good outcomes, and it helps a lot of people from severe suffering.
What do you make of the argument, though, that you don't want zombie companies running around, that the United States shouldn't be in the quote unquote bailout business for everybody? Maybe movie theaters in the future aren't a great business. Should they be bailed out? I mean, these are questions that you are starting to hear people talk about.
I know, I see all that stuff. Look, this is, you cannot have a perfect answer to this one. So obviously, you're right, there's going to be creative destruction, and some guys shouldn't survive, we're bailing out. But we need to get through the problem. And yes, America's amazingly innovative. You're going to see you've actually seen a lot of business startups that are, while you have some more failing, you have a lot starting up today. But I wouldn't not do the right thing because you might be helping a few zombie companies. I think that's a bad way to think about it. And on the other hand, you can't go out there and say, I think there were 5 million PPP loans. Right. Who's going to sit down and say, well, these won't survive and these will? We don't have the time to do that. Get through the problem and then don't make it worse. I mean, I think we make it worse if we don't get through the problem. So, and then we have other issues to deal with, really serious issues. Infrastructure. Everyone wants infrastructure bill. Work skills. We got to get people in the inner cities getting the skills they need to get good paying jobs, and it's doable. We've done it in Detroit, we've done it in Paris. Right. One of my guys was telling me this morning that we dealt with the socialist mayor in Paris. She does not care that I'm a capitalist. I don't care if she's a socialist. We're helping 10,000 kids in the slums of Paris get jobs. We both agree on that. Jobs for those kids is livelihood, it's dignity, it's growth, it's family formation. So let's keep our eye focused when we need education, skills, healthcare properly delivered to America, et cetera.
Okay, so policy question. Of course, there's always the question of how to pay for all of this. President or Vice President Biden, the president-elect, planning to raise corporate taxes and individual taxes on people making over $400,000. Is that the right thing to do in the midst of the pandemic? And if it isn't, how do you pay for these things?
Yeah, so we know we have to pay for it. And before I give it, I will give you a specific answer. There are taxes that hurt growth and taxes that don't. Okay, so taxing my income a little bit more, that does not hurt growth. Taxing capital formation over time hurts growth. So I think we should have a competitive international tax system for business. I think that should be a sine qua non. And then if you have to get more taxes, you can go do it other ways. I think I would also expand things like the earned income tax credit so that people who have a job basically will get $6,000 or $7,000 or $8,000 from the federal government. So that job paying $7 an hour is now paying $12 an hour. So I would do things. They do cost money. Right. But the most important thing is that when you ask that question, we get so small-minded. Okay, we ended World War II in 1950. We had 120% GDP to debt to GDP. How are we going to get out of that? Between 1950 and 1960, it went from 120% to 60%. Taxes didn't go up, debt didn't go down. We had 4% growth. So if I was anyone, I'd focus on healthy growth. The best thing to get out of this is healthy growth. Growth pays for everything. And I think a lot of our policies have slowed down our growth. Our inability to do infrastructure, a lack of an immigration bill, a lack of education, those things damage growth. So my view is focus on growth. And yes, of course, you have to tax. Taxes are going to have to go up somewhere, and I completely understand that. But focus on healthy growth. Don't focus on just, if you think taxes is the only way to go, you're probably making a little bit of a mistake.
You and I are in agreement on that. The question, of course, is what's then the right tax policy, and when do you do it? And when do you do it in regard to the other issue is, philosophically, it appears that there's a view in the market and the public that not only is the Fed going to backstop everybody, but now, now fiscal policy is going to backstop everybody. It's almost a form of insurance. And the question is, how do you price that insurance?
Yeah. So again, get through this as best you can. That minimizes the future problem. Maximize growth. That minimizes the future problem. That makes how important this is. For 10 years after the Great Financial Recession, we grew 20% cumulatively. It should have been 40%. I think it wasn't 40% because of our own bad policies around infrastructure, immigration, taxation, regulation, and stuff like that. 20% more growth would have been $4 trillion more GDP. $4 trillion in 1 year, $12 trillion cumulatively over the 10-year period. So to me, so we need those things. Matter of fact, infrastructure today, you could say it costs money. It costs more money not to fix it than it will cost to fix it. But we don't account for it properly. So, to me, we will get the taxes you need, but focus on growth. If you have very low growth and it's all about taking from Peter to pay Paul, right, then you're going to have more political division, more problems, and you haven't helped the citizens of America who are kind of pissed off that things aren't working well. And so growth pays for everything, healthy growth, and then you could build better safety nets and better school systems and all those kind of things. And I think it's doable if policymakers focus on that. And I totally agree with you. The Fed can't bail out everything. This notion, I was speaking to Fed, not the U.S. Fed, but overseas, is like, they can't allow a bank failure. They can't allow. Of course you can. Of course, failure's fine. Stop acting like every little ripple in the market, the Fed's got to come in. They don't. Well, the country will be fine. But I think Jay Powell and the Fed did exactly the right thing in March, April, to stabilize the financial system. Because I agree with Masan, what we didn't want is a Great Depression and a financial crisis. A financial crisis meaning not only did unemployment go to 15 or 20%, but companies now couldn't get money, they couldn't get financing, et cetera. So I think they did the right thing, and right now you've got very open markets. Companies are quite prepared, and like I said, what we really should focus on is getting through to the time that vaccine is broadly distributed.
Got to ask, because you have strong views and lots of experience, would you want to be the Treasury Secretary? There was a column in the New York Post over the weekend suggesting you should be.
Yeah, I love what I do, and I've never coveted the job, ever. And, some people do, and I applaud that. I think public service, I love my country, so I will help anyone who has that job. And I do want to say public, I think Stephen Mnuchin did one outstanding job there for a bunch of reasons. And I told the New York Times, they wrote an article I thought was grossly unfair to him about his capabilities. But no, I want to do this job. That's what I want to do. If I ever get a call to help, I always take those calls and try to offer my help to whoever's Secretary of Treasury.
Are you concerned?
And any president, by the way.
Who would you like to see be the Treasury Secretary?
I'm going to leave it up to the politicians. They're going to pick it. They're well along the way, it seems to me, to picking someone. Whoever that person was, I will try to help them.
But do you think that they should have Wall Street experience? Because one of the things, and there's a conversation coming up after we speak with Elizabeth Warren, she's been very outspoken about wanting to drain the swamp, if you will, and doesn't want people with not necessarily experience on Wall Street, but doesn't want an administration overloaded or overwhelmed with them.
Well, look, I completely understand that sentiment. So what you want is someone who's capable, smart, knowledgeable, they know stuff, they got detail, they're kind of more apolitical than political. If you've got secretaries of Treasury and people at the Fed and people at jobs and they're like trying to read the tea leaves and they only live to be in politics to be in the White House again, that's probably not good. So capable, I think, and I do think practical experience matters. Right. It doesn't matter solely, but it does matter. And so if you said to me, if purely academics, pure economists, I say, no, you may be barking up the wrong tree there.
I want to pivot just for a second to what's going on in society at large, both your own personal experience during COVID and what happens next. So many people are still working from home, though there are a lot of people that are on the job. We talked to Bill Gates yesterday about what he thinks the world looks like when this pandemic's over, and he said he thought that business travel would be cut 50%, potentially forever, and he thought that 30% of the time people would be working from home. I know you've been traveling a lot during this period, and I know you like seeing people. Are you in agreement or not?
Somewhat. First of all, Mary Erdo's got a note from a friend and a big client in China the other day saying that the folks there are 100% back to work. Okay, so just take a deep breath, and so I do think there'll be this, and I've been on the road, I've been to California, there's nothing like personal relationships and seeing people and sharing ideas, and so if you look at, I do think 30% is probably a good number of less seats you're going to need in office buildings because people will be rotating, working from home, full-time, part-time. Okay, that's fine. That's an adjustment. It's not devastating to the world. I think business travel will be less. I don't know if it's 50%. What'll happen is it'll drop and then it'll start to grow again. And then people make adjustments to that. But then take someone like me. I have to go to see my clients and my leadership everywhere around the world. I'm going to travel just as much. There's no way I'm going to travel less. I need to see people face to face. I need to see our leaders. I need to do town halls, and you just learn so much. So my trip to California, I met 100 people, all outside, all safe. CEOs, venture capitalists. It's amazing how much you'll learn. There are other problems with, quote, work from home. Young people, it's an apprenticeship system. They learn by being on the road with you, by seeing how you deal with problems. Creativity, a lot of creativity is accidental, where you run into people and it's kind of spontaneous. Steve Jobs used to talk about that. So there'll be adjustments. The world will change. There'll be some work from home. Business travel will kind of drop. I don't know, 50%. Remember, there's a competitive element here too, which is, if I'm kind of the gung-ho person, I want to get to business, taking that trip may be much different than saying, I'll meet you in a Zoom. And so, and I think people like me will travel as much and Zoom more.
Right. Do you think there's going to be a huge amount of spending and travel at the end of this pandemic? I mean, one of the things we've seen, Janet Yellen was just talking about it earlier this week, a huge glut of savings. And I don't know what you think that says about the economy and what it may say about the economy in the future.
Yeah, so all that PPP and all that money and all that unemployment insurance and PUA and PUIC and all that stuff, it went into people's accounts. And you could clearly see their savings are way up. By the way, that at the lower end, think of the bottom 20%, they're back to where they were in February. So that it went up and they've kind of spent it, and now they're hitting, it looks like they're hitting kind of where they were. They have to cut back on spending or something like that. But I do agree with Janet, huge amount of pent up demand. And that pent up demand, and you're seeing it in some areas being spent today, like home improvement. Right. You might very well see travel. People like to travel on vacation, and so I think some of our guys were arguing this morning about what's going to come back bigger. The cruise lines, the travel airlines, and so we'll see. But there will be huge pent up demand.
How much do you think of that's moved into the market? We had asked Masa yesterday about whether there was a market bubble. In fact, we actually asked. This would be a good time to show it. We asked everybody in our audience, and thousands of people responded whether they thought there was a market bubble. And if I'm right, we had 66% say they thought there was a market bubble taking place right now. What do you think about the market unto itself?
The market is always wrong and always right. So to give you some big numbers, I think the value of all securities in the world is like $275 trillion. The central banks of the world did more than $10 trillion of QE, and fiscal stimulus in the world was more than $10 trillion. That's a huge amount that filters into spending and investing and stuff like that, and clearly elevates asset prices, even though it's hard for me to say which ones to have. Now, take the FANG stocks. Okay, I think they're worth like $6 trillion. I think all of Europe stock exchange is $7 trillion. All of China is $10 trillion. Okay, and so yeah, there might be a bubble in certain things, but it's not in everything. There are a lot of things, if you look at them, they're not in bubble type of territory. And the thing you got to always understand about the stock market is it is a forecast of the future, but it doesn't know the future. So if things turn out where unemployment continues to go down, we get through this, the vaccine is there, we have good growth, prices will be justified. You know, if for some reason we're in a stall and we kind of stall out of this thing and unemployment starts going up, no, they won't be justified. So even the market isn't a perfect prognosticator of the future. But you have to understand that amount of fiscal monetary stimulation has an effect on asset prices. And so there will be a counter effect if they have to do the reverse. And they might one day have to do that.
Let me pivot for a moment to an issue I know that you care deeply about, which is racial equality. You have been both criticized but also lauded for what you've been doing with racial equality. You wrote recently, "Systemic racism is a tragic part of America's history," and you went on to devote $30 billion to racial equality. At the same time, as I mentioned, there has been criticism directed at the bank specifically. What's been the lesson for you this year?
Look, so COVID and the murder of George Floyd pointed out something that we already knew, that there's been inequality in America, and it's worse and it's damaging, and the racial part of it is even worse. And so, after the Civil War, there's supposed to be 4 acres and a mule, which basically never happened. Ulysses S. Grant, who fought for the black person, made sure he wanted to treat them like full Americans at the time. He sent down federal troops into Mississippi and Alabama to stop people like the Ku Klux Klan and kicked out a governor and stuff like that. And then for 70 years, we did nothing. So it is outrageous. The racial inequality is terrible. To recognize it is right, and to do something about it is absolutely right thing to do. And I'm gratified that all these people are now doing it, which includes all these big companies. So people like JPMorgan, they've always been trying to do this. Now, it doesn't mean we didn't have problems, because all institutions do, but we know what we want. We want to double down and do a better job. The BRT's doing it. Every company's doing it. I'm gratified for anyone on this call is doing it. And that's around education, skills, second chance for people with criminal backgrounds. It's around all these things that we have to do to make it a better world for the people who live here. And I feel the same way for helping all of our people, LGBT, you can be Asian, Muslim, Black, Jewish. I want you to be able to walk into JPMorgan and feel treated properly, given equal opportunity, get the help you need if you have a problem of some sort. And so our $30 billion thing is very specific. And we're adding loan officers in lower middle income neighborhoods. We're in like 2,000 of the lower income neighborhoods in America. So we're going to do $8 billion of more mortgages targeted to the black community. We're going to do, I think it's $18 billion of affordable housing. We're going to help more and more entrepreneurs of color, small businesses, try to grow their businesses, and a lot on work skills. I think we hired 3,000 ex-felons last year. Okay, I just think it's really important that we all give people a chance in the society. And so we're doubling down on that. And I think it's unbelievable what the Business Roundtable is doing, led by Doug McMillan, so I applaud that. And we learn by watching what a lot of other people do. So a lot of people on this call, I see what you do, and I think people are just doing some fabulous things. And we have to do it long-term, sustained, deliberately, and we'll start to bend that curve.
Okay, so here's a question. We're going to have, we should say Robert Smith is going to be with us later, who's really talked about this 2% idea. We'll talk about that. Killer Mike and Ursula Burns as well, and then we're going to have LeBron James later in the day also discussing some of these issues. But the question I ask you is, when you do these things, and when business does these things, should they think of them as business, profitable enterprise business, to go into these areas? Or is this supposed to be thought of in a philanthropic way? And I think that a lot of business leaders are trying to think about those two distinctions and what the cost of, I hate to say it, cost of capital should be considered when making some of these investments.
Yeah, I think you should, anytime you run a business, you should be very analytical and detailed about what you're doing and why you're doing it. And it's both, Andrew. There's some philanthropic dollars that do certain things that can't be done. We spend hundreds of millions of dollars in philanthropy a year. And then there's, but if you want real sustainable stuff, do a little bit of both. So we use philanthropy dollars to help small businesses get to a certain point, and then we make them loans. We want them bankable. We want them to grow. A real sustained effort of things that actually work. So in the inner city here, there are 30 CEOs who signed up for the New York City C.E.O. Jobs Council. all equal partners in this, where we're working with CUNY, which has 500,000 kids in it, to get those kids the training they need to get out and have a job. So you can major in philosophy, but take a few coding classes, you can get paid $75,000 a year. And so, I'm gratified that people are actually saying we're going to go in the industry. Now, we need the jobs. We need the kids. Fasunda Duckett, who runs our retail system, he has started these community branches.
She's amazing. You and I have talked about her. She's amazing.
Yeah, and we just put one in Minneapolis near where George Floyd was. So it's a community center where helps build a community. So small businesses come in, they get to know each other, they learn from each other. We have people who come in and educate them and how they can run a better business. And that we want that also to be profitable. We want to bank the unbanked, but we don't want to make it a charity thing where you do it for a couple of years and then the next CEO comes in, they have a problem, they got to get rid of it. And so you try to make it both. Use philanthropy dollars to get it going, and then have a machine that works over time. So we have great products coming for the underbanked today that we think are very cheap and very good for them, and for us it'll be marginally break even.
Jamie, we're getting lots of questions, and there's a couple, actually more than a couple, on one specific issue. So I want to ask you directly about it. It's a conversation actually that you and I probably began, frankly, 3 or 4 years ago. I asked you about Bitcoin, if you remember. We were on a stage together. And back then, you said, I believe, that you were not a believer in Bitcoin. I think you were worried that the government might not allow Bitcoin, but that you were a fan of cryptocurrency. It appears you've changed your mind. They want to know why. Walk us through what happened.
I don't know if I've changed my mind. We use the blockchain. We have the JPMorgan coin, which is a dollar-backed blockchain. You can move the money, split it into little pieces, go with information. So we're a believer in that. And we're a believer in cryptocurrency, properly regulated and properly backed. Bitcoin is kind of different, and that's not my cup of tea. And I don't want to make news in this particular thing. I'm not really interested in Bitcoin. I'm interested in properly structured AML, KYC, helping people do things cheaply. The blockchain itself will be critical to letting people move money around the world cheaper.
Right.
That will absolutely be critical, and we're at the forefront of that. We always support the blockchain, by the way. That was never part of the Bitcoin comment.
So I appreciate the point you're making, but just to make the distinction, so you have not changed your position on Bitcoin. Back then, I remember you thought that the government wouldn't, because it wasn't regulated, you thought properly, and I don't know if you ever thought it could be properly regulated. That was the argument against it. Are you in the same place?
My experience with the government is they can regulate whatever they want when they feel like it. And Bitcoin is worth $200 billion, something like that. If it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, it will be regulated. And so and by the way, around the world, it's already started to happen. It doesn't mean you can't buy yourself Bitcoin. There are a lot of very smart people who think that $200 billion will be worth more than gold, will appreciate more than gold or the U.S. dollar or U.S. Treasuries, and let them do that. I'm not. Right. That's just not my cup of tea.
Okay. We got two other questions, and many of them around this topic. So I should just ask, what is JPMorgan doing on this issue of climate change, and most importantly, what do you think of Biden's proposed initiatives on climate?
Yeah, so we actually announced that we support the Paris Climate Accord, and we have a carbon center of excellence, and we've talked to all our clients in automotive, oil, utilities, et cetera, about how do you get CO2 down. We need to get CO2 down. It is a problem. It's a global problem. As you know, CO2 is growing dramatically in India and China. It has been coming down in the U.S. We need proper policy based upon mature, thoughtful, analytical, detailed, what works and what doesn't work. So we've started this concept, which a lot of other people are doing too, carbon intensity. So there's a lot less carbon intensity in that type of product and that type of product, in that car versus that car and that thing. And so that's the best way to do a transition. And we need a carbon tax. You're not going to survive. We need good government policy, both a carbon tax and then very specific policy around certain industries and stuff like that.
Do you think a carbon tax is realistic at this point?
But Andrew, if you do it right, you can do it cheap. If you do it wrong, you won't accomplish it, and it will really hurt the economy.
Okay, but dig into that. How would you do it? How would you do it cheap?
Carbon intensity, like maturely, carbon intensity. So if your type of oil out of that ground, or that pipeline is carbon intensity is 4 times, that they have to pay for that a little bit, and people help them move a transition. But at the end of the day, carbon tax, carbon dividend. So that people are making those decisions all the time, reducing their carbon footprint. And you need a global deal. Again, you cannot solve the problem in the United States alone. And so you really got to be quite careful. But I think it's doable. I think, we have a common interest with China and India to fix this problem. And there are things we can do with technology that can help them. I mean, I read somewhere that if you simply got them to cook with propane as opposed to wood, the pollution would drop dramatically.
Right.
And of course, those propane things cost $50, and maybe the average Indian can't afford that. So that's where we can step in and help.
Lots of now questions coming in about China, about what should happen to these tariffs. The Business Roundtable, as you know, came out yesterday and said that these tariffs need to get taken down, that the heat needs to get taken off this conversation. Hank Paulson, the former Treasury Secretary, said something similar on Monday. Where do you stand?
So Americans shouldn't overestimate or underestimate China. They're a competitor, so be it. We'll deal with that. We have lots of other competitors around the world. They've got a huge amount of problems of their own: corruption, water, oil, energy, innovation, lack of transparency, corruption. Their neighbors, they're surrounded by Russia, India, Pakistan, the Koreas, Philippines, Indonesia, Vietnam. It's a tough part of the world. So America's in very good shape. So cooperation, strategic, have a conversation. We're not going to have a decoupling, we'll have a restructuring. And to the extent that, national security, we don't have to buy Huawei. To the extent that they already don't allow certain things to take place there, we should work with our allies intelligently. America needs to lead in an enlightened way, not an arrogant way, and not like it's got to be our way all the time, right, but lead with our European allies or Japanese allies and tell the Chinese, here are the terms of trade that are fair around, subsidizing state enterprises, around, IP or what you can buy in terms of investment rights inside different countries, and it's achievable. And I'm hoping that President Biden, with his people, we know some of the folks who are quite good, that they start that strategic cooperation. They should be tough. They should be fair. The Chinese have a lot of their own serious problems. The Chinese GDP per person, and listen closely to this, is $10,000. Ours is something like 60. If they do a good job managing their economy, in 15 years, it'll be $20,000. Ours in 20 years or 25 years, if we do a bad job managing the economy, will be 120. Our demographics are good. I don't think we do a very good job managing the economy, by the way, because I think we've done a terrible job the last 20 years or so around the things I've already mentioned. But, we're in good shape. And we've got innovation and growth. And I mentioned the FANG. I mean, look at what Silicon Valley creates. We've got the best financial system in the world, which is a huge benefit to America, by the way. Open, transparent, people can invest, the whole mosaic, venture capital, private equity, banks, non-banks. We're in pretty good shape, but we do need serious conversation. I agree. I wouldn't have done the tariffs. I do think that President Trump got them to the table in a way that they never quite took it as seriously before, and that business, backed him, because I think all of us, business and government, waited too long to do that. We should have, 10 years earlier started working with China. I remember when President Obama spoke to BRT and said, you guys complain to me privately about China, but whenever I talk to anyone else, you always tell me how great it is. And you're telling the Chinese government how great it is, because most of the companies are happy to be there. So business can help lead the conversation, so you have a level playing field, fair, it can enhance growth, and then deal with some of the very complex issues around data, privacy, et cetera.
How much confidence do you have, and I don't know, maybe you've talked to President-elect Biden already, that so many of these issues that we're talking about will get solved in the next 4 years?
My biggest frustration, Andrew, is that America, sometimes you should look inside. Our problems are not because immigration, China, trade, or stuff like that. They were because of our own inability. I'm talking about over 20 or 30 years. We can't get immigration done. That would improve, that would make it a happier country. Like DACA stays, more merit-based, a path to citizenship for the 12 million. Chuck Schumer and McCain had a bill. The Republicans, the Democrats won, we can't get it passed. That would grow the economy 0.3% a year. Infrastructure, we all know about it, 0.3% a year. Proper regulation, some of our regulations stifle, and forget big banks, they stifle the formation of small business. 50 million people don't have health care. We've got the best health care in the world, but it costs twice as much, 3 times as much as Singapore, by the way, and our outcomes aren't better. We have too much obesity. I've already spoken about the inner city schools, where we don't get the kids the skills they need to have a living wage anymore. Whereas if you go back 30 years, you didn't really have to, if you can read or write, you can get a living wage, and I go on and on and on about our own inabilities. You all know the criminal justice reform. I mean, it's outrageous the chances we don't give people who paid their price in society. And so I think we should focus inward. Do I have high hopes we're going to fix all that? No. What I've seen is that we just are not good at thoughtful, long-term policy. I'm praying and hoping that we get better at it, and I'm hoping and I wish and I'll do anything I can to help President Biden or anyone who's pushing those jobs to do better for our country. It is the most important thing we do. America's leadership is predicated upon its economic strength. Its military strength is predicated on economic strength. And if we don't get it right, it will be bad for the world for the next 50 years. And so there is nothing more important that we kind of, in my view, focus our own problems, take a leadership role in the world.
Okay, final question for you, Jamie. I don't know if you remember this. Back in 2008, during the financial crisis, you told me the story, your daughter called you and said, "What's a financial crisis?"
Yeah.
And you said to her something that happens every 7 or 8 years. That was back in 2008. We didn't have a financial crisis, maybe until now. I don't know if you think this counts or not, given where we are. Does it?
Of course it does, because Andrew, what I've always pointed out, like the silliness of like people preparing. I mean, like even I always say a C-car. It's like that's one little thing, but the problems that get created are not the ones you figured out, like mortgages in the past, or COVID this time, or World War. Henry Kissinger would talk about World War I. No one anticipated what would happen that would create a World War I, which is a war that actually no one wanted. So problems are never the ones you see. They're always out there. They're going to come different in a different way. And the best protection is resiliency for the banking system. It's capital, liquidity. Like I say, it's capital, it's liquidity, it's profitability, it's diversification. And a lot of those things don't get counted at all in some of the regulations. And for but that resiliency is true for America. Like some of us, a lot of companies didn't have resilient supply lines, which they discovered because of COVID, where they should have 2 or 3 vendors as opposed to one. And so, but it's an enormously resilient country. But the stronger we make our institutions, the stronger government is, the stronger the financial system is, the more resilient you are to deal with what will be unexpected, unexplained, and unpredictable type of things in the future. And they will happen again.
Jamie Dimon, everybody, thank you for the conversation. Thank you all for the questions and joining us this morning. Jamie, thank you again. Look forward to seeing you in person.
I can't wait to see you all, and say hi to Becky and Joe for me.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks, everybody.